Every single time you see me here in the studio recording the show, I am using an Uplift standing desk. I've been using Uplift standing desks for years, long before they were a sponsor. A standing desk gets my creative juices flowing. It's better for your health. And Uplift desk is the best in the business. Sturdier than other brands I've tried. Thousands of ways to customize the desk, choose the shape, material, accessories, and more. Go to upliftdesk.com/Pacman to receive up to $300 off, plus 4 free desk accessories. The link is in the description. Welcome to the show. Let's start today with loyalty and betrayal. Very dark sort of way to start. We know that if nothing else, Donald Trump's base in the Republican Party at its core today is based around loyalty. It's not just the dictionary definition of loyalty. It's based around this sort of perversion or cartoonish version of loyalty in which you unfailingly and unflinchingly support and defend any crazy notion that Donald Trump puts forward. A lot of these Trumpists may be clueless politically. They may have all of the wrong ethical and moral instincts. They may be fine with completely un-American political agendas, but through it all, impeachments, indictments, everything in between, Sharpie, hurricane maps, they have stood by Trump. They see him as their champion, who is fighting against the so-called establishment, whether it's the deep state or the fake news media or whatever the case may be. They are all in. But there may be a betrayal coming that they have no idea about and could not possibly see. Because the reality is that many of Trump's planned policies and actions for his new term might hit his supporters the hardest. We've talked about this before. We're talking about betrayal on taxes, on healthcare, even on Social Security, policies that could end up, likely will end up, hurting the very people that are cheering Trump on. Remember Donald Trump's big 2017 tax cuts, which were hyped up as helping the middle class? But what actually happened? It was the wealthiest Americans that got the biggest benefits, while many of his working class supporters saw little or no impact, and the deficit completely exploded, which if you believe that an explosive deficit is bad for the middle class, then it was very bad for the middle class. So now Trump is coming back. He wants to do it again with another round of tax cuts or extensions. And who do you really think is going to benefit? His core base certainly is not. Economists are warning that this is going to explode the deficit again, potentially forcing cuts to federal programs that many of his supporters rely on. Now, the funny thing is, they brag about cutting federal programs. They brag about eliminating entire governmental departments. There are two contradictions there. Number one, we'll talk about it later. Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy will be co-chairing a new government department for efficiency. They are building a department to cut down departments. I know it doesn't make any sense. But more importantly, even though a lot of these Trump supporters loyally stand by and salute and say, yes, sir, cut the programs, they themselves will be hurt by the cutting of the very programs that they cheer cutting. It's not exactly a big win for the MAGA crowd, who are counting on stable federal assistance in what might become tough economic times under Trump. I hope they don't. I hope Trump succeeds. I hope the economy is good. Then there's healthcare. Trump's been promising for years he will protect people's access to healthcare through some big, beautiful replacement to Obamacare. His first administration consistently undermined the Affordable Care Act, also known as Obamacare. MAGA Mike Johnson, the current Speaker of the House, admitted shortly before the election Obamacare will be gone if Donald Trump wins. And millions of Trump's own followers could lose coverage entirely if Trump gets his way. Who is going to get hit the hardest by the healthcare policies they voted for? It's the people who voted for it. It's the MAGA voters in rural areas, many of whom depend on affordable care plans or Medicaid for their health care. They cheered Trump's promises, cut this, cut that, but if he gets his way, they're going to be left in the dust. And then we did economic policy, we did healthcare policy, now we get to Social Security, and this is a really big one. Trump has hinted at plans to defer some payroll taxes. Sounds very good. Hey, if you cut my contribution to Social Security, that sounds like a beautiful thing. Of course, those are the very taxes that fund Social Security. Without the funding, the Social Security Trust Fund could dry up, and it could dry up quickly, and it would start to put future Social Security benefits at risk. Now, I have to mention in talking about this, a lot of these Republicans want to hurt Social Security. What they really want to do is justify privatizing Social Security. And much like they want to privatize education, so make public education really bad, that makes the case for privatizing it better. They want to privatize Social Security. Well, one of the best ways to convince people it should be done is by making Social Security not work. In the meantime, however, it's Trump's own voters who are going to suffer. Millions of his supporters, including people close to retirement, could face reduced Social Security payments or delayed benefits because of the very cuts that Donald Trump wants to do. This is a betrayal, and it's a betrayal that is very much going to sting. So there are really two parts to this. First, is this what MAGA signed up for? Many of his supporters put their trust in Trump to drain the swamp and protect their interests, and everything he does is going to be so good for them. They are the ones that are going to get crushed. But then part two is, will they realize it? And this is always such a disconnect with so many voters in general, but in particular with these low information MAGA voters. Remember that after Obamacare was passed in 2010, many Republican governors opted out of the Medicaid expansion. This was part of Obamacare. It was offered to states. Many states said, no, thank you. Republican voters in those states who said, wait a second, they did Obamacare and I don't have health care, it must be Obama's fault. The real blame should have fallen with their Republican governors. Their governors rejected the Medicaid expansion, and yet they blamed Barack Obama. So the point here is, even though Trump is almost certainly going to betray these people, just like he did in his first term, even though they are going to suffer as a result of the things that Donald Trump is going to do, if he does them, because Trump makes many promises that he doesn't actually keep, sadly, tragically, unfortunately, they will probably find some Democrat to blame it on. Something Obama did 12 years ago, something Joe Biden did before leaving office. What about Kamala? Maybe they'll blame Kamala or something like that. Kamala Harris, of course, not even involved in much of the stuff that Republicans love to blame her for. So yeah, Trump is going to betray them. They don't see it coming, but the craziest part of it all is they may never realize that it was as a result of the guy they voted for that they will end up suffering. I hope it doesn't happen. I don't hope for the failure of presidents, and I don't hope for the misery of other people. But it's what may happen, and we will be ready for it. Hey, this is so funny. You know, they finally found the fraud in last week's election. Let me set this up for you. In 2020, it was all fraud. The presidential election was fraudulent because Trump lost. Carrie Lake's loss in Arizona for governor was fraudulent because she lost. And in the first hours of Election Day last week, Trump was claiming voter fraud in Pennsylvania. They were saying we need law enforcement in Detroit because of fraud. And then as it became clear that Donald Trump was going to win, the number of posts about fraud on Twitter declined precipitously. MAGA Mike Johnson said, fortunately, there was no fraud this time because we won. Jim Jordan went on CNN, we'll look at the clip later, and said, there was no fraud this time. We fixed the fraud because they won. But there is one guy who pathetically, humiliatingly, and childishly is now saying there was fraud. There was fraud. His name is Eric Hovde. This is this California rich dude who claims to live in Wisconsin to run against Democratic incumbent Tammy Baldwin. Tammy Baldwin won. She won. And now Eric Hovde is saying there was fraud. He posted an excretion to X yesterday, where he said, quote, "Many people have reached out to me with concerns about the voting inconsistencies we experienced on Election Day. Here are my thoughts." Here is Eric Hovde. I apologize. I just punched the microphone. I know that's unpleasant for people with headphones. I'm going to try not to do it again. I'm just getting so worked up about this. Here is Eric Hovde, and he's essentially blaming the infamous massive dumps. There was a dump of ballots that he finds very suspicious.
Many people have been wondering why I have remained quiet since election night. I believe it's better not to comment until I have the facts.
Right.
Wisconsin Election Commission is in the final process of finalizing the canvass from last Tuesday's election. Like many of my supporters, I was shocked by what unfolded on election night. At 1 a.m., I was receiving calls of congratulations, and based on the models, it appeared I would win the Senate race.
And then the dumps.
Then at 4 a.m., Milwaukee reported approximately 108,000 absentee ballots, with Senator Baldwin receiving nearly 90% of those ballots. Statistically, this outcome seems improbable, as it didn't match the patterns from same-day voting in Milwaukee.
It didn't match. It didn't.
Where I received 22% of the votes. Since last Wednesday, numerous parties have reached out to me about voting inconsistencies, such as certain voting precincts in Milwaukee having turnout of over 150% of registered voters, and in some cases...
As always, these claims are never true. Look, don't even take my word for it. They love to claim twice the number of people who live there voted. It's not possible. That's right. It's not possible. It didn't happen.
Cases over 200%. Additionally, in 2020, President Biden received 10 million more votes than Vice President Harris did last Tuesday.
Of course, that number has since diminished dramatically.
Yet in Milwaukee, even though the population of Milwaukee has declined and registered vote...
All right, you get it. Milwaukee. Listen, we are supposed to believe, if you believe Eric Hovde, we are supposed to believe that Democrats rigged the Wisconsin Senate election, but they forgot to rig the presidential one, where Kamala Harris only lost by a fraction of 1 percentage point. Why on earth, if you have the ability, wherewithal, willingness, and plan to rig the Senate election, which, by the way, it's not even consequential in the Senate balance. Whether or not Eric Hovde wins that Senate race, Republicans control the Senate. They don't have a supermajority either way. Think about how inconsequential it is. Eric Hovde's seat wouldn't be the difference maker in Republicans controlling the Senate, and it wouldn't be the difference maker in Republicans getting to 60 Senate seats. It's inconsequential, but they go out of their way to rig the whole thing to keep Tammy Baldwin in the Senate, but they don't go, hey, by the way, while we're rigging this, we're rigging the ballots, we're dumping, let's also rig it so Kamala wins. No, they allow Kamala Harris to lose by less than 1 percentage point. Put aside the fact that when they claim twice the population actually voted and it's not true, put aside all of the lies. It makes no sense even passing the basic sniff test. But Eric Hovde wants us to believe that it was fraud in Milwaukee, and it didn't, D-I-N-T, it didn't make sense. Send this guy back to California or wherever he really lives, and let's never hear from him again. Hey, this is beyond parody, okay? Listen to this. Donald Trump wants to reduce the size of government, eliminate superfluous and unnecessary government jobs, cut down the number of government departments, and he will be hiring not one, but 2 people to run a new Department of Government Efficiency. The names of those people are Elon Musk and multiple-time guest on the David Pakman Show, Vivek Ramaswamy. Consider how every detail is hilarious. A department on efficiency, which will have two leaders, unlike every other department that has one leader. It's mind-blowingly hilarious. And creating a government agency to clean up government agencies, does that make sense? None of it makes sense. The one thing I will tell you is if we want to be at all even potentially optimistic, it's potentially optimistic. The fact that this is all so vague and the fact that you do have two people running it, Elon and Vivek, as opposed to one, and they might get in each other's way. They might not efficiently run the Department of Efficiency because there's two of them instead of one making the decisions. It could be that this ends up accomplishing absolutely nothing. If they get their way, they will decimate departments. They will do wholesale firings of people. I mean, it'll be, if this actually works out to be what Trump wants it to be, it will be very bad, very, very bad. But because it seems like the efficiency department is going to be run so inefficiently, they might not get much accomplished. Now, let me zoom out a little bit. This is another reminder and confirmation that when they talk about their principles, they don't really mean it. They don't mean it. On the one hand, they say, Trump says, MAGA says, we want to cut down the size of government, the number of departments, the people, the bureaucracy, the levels of management. And then he creates a new department now to explore that. And it's going to be run not by one person, but by two people. It's yet again, the principle doesn't really matter when it becomes inconvenient. And we've seen this in so many other ways. We're for a lower deficit. Trump blows up the deficit and blames other people. We're against business regulation, except when we really want our conspiracy theories published by private companies to social media. Then we want to regulate and force social media companies to publish anything that our outrageous supporters say that they want to publish. So it's really important. Yesterday, I was actually reading the audiobook version of my book, and we recorded the chapter on how quickly the principles are ignored when they are no longer convenient, and why engaging in these philosophical black holes about only principles really doesn't make any sense. So this is very fresh. This is an absolute and total classic for them. Here's our principles. We're now going to ignore them because we need to own the left, or we need to hurt somebody politically, or we need to achieve something that we claimed we want to do. Pathetic, laughable, hilarious. If there's any upside, it might be that the damage that Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy are able to do in this role might be smaller than what they would do if they were given, other, I might call them real jobs, rather pre-existing jobs in the administration. Let's take a break. So much more to talk about, including Secretary of Defense, Fox News host. It's not a joke. It is a nightmare, but it's not a joke. I spend a lot of my day in front of screens, and sitting for long periods has been linked to poor heart health, bad posture, diabetes, the list goes on. And this is one of the many reasons I started using an Uplift standing desk many years ago, long before they became a sponsor. I stand when I'm doing work at the desk. I sit to film, and it's all on the same adjustable desk. A standing desk boosts my energy throughout the day, makes it easier to stay alert. I use the desk for everything. I'm sitting at it right now. I use it every day to record. I've tried a ton of different standing desks. A lot of them are wobbly or cheap. They don't provide cable management options. I've stuck with Uplift Desk for so long because it is rock solid and stable, built to last, super high quality materials, and they offer way more customization options. So many different things: keyboard trays, file cabinets, headphone holders, desktop computer trays, and everything you really need. And their desk configurator tool lets you customize it exactly the way you want: storage, ergonomic seating, wire management, all of it. And Uplift Desk is giving my audience up to $300 off plus 4 free accessories when you go to upliftdesk.com/Pacman. The link is in the description. There truly has never been a more important time to support progressive independent media. And I have to say such a huge thank you to the 1,100 new members we've had in the calendar month of November so far. Thanks to everybody who signed up at joinpacman.com. You can use the coupon code NOTAGAIN to get a massive discount. And also remember to pre-order my forthcoming book, The Echo Machine. Now about halfway through recording the audiobook, available in hardcover, ebook, and audiobook at davidpacman.com/echo or anywhere books are sold, including local bookstores. You can call any local bookstore and say, excuse me, I'd like to order The Echo Machine by David Pacman, and they will get it for you in pre-order. It brings me no pleasure to report to you that we are now just one step away from Secretary of the Interior Mike Pillow. This is not a joke. This is not a drill. Donald Trump has nominated a random Fox News guy to be the Secretary of Defense of the United States. Pete Hegseth is going to be Trump's Secretary of Defense if he can get confirmed. He is one of the co-hosts on Weekend Fox and Friends. Trump publishing a screed that says, I am honored to announce that I have nominated Pete Hegseth to serve in my cabinet as the Secretary of Defense. Pete has spent his entire life as a warrior for the troops and for the country. Pete is tough, smart, and a true believer in America first. With Pete at the helm, America's enemies are on notice. Our military will be great again, and America will never back down. Pete is a graduate of Princeton and a graduate degree from Harvard University and a combat veteran, etc., etc., etc. Here is Pete Hegseth saying he doesn't wash his hands.
As I told you, my 2019 resolution is to say things on air that I say off air. I don't think I've washed my hands for 10 years. Really, I don't really wash my hands ever.
Help me.
No, I inoculate myself. It's just not, germs are not a real thing. I can't see them, therefore they're not real.
So you're becoming immune to all the bacteria.
You know, Trump's quite the germaphobe, so I don't know that this is exactly a match made in heaven, but this is obviously much more serious than just joking around. Because as wild as it is to see Donald Trump picking a suck-up Fox News host to be Secretary of Defense, it's also wacky when you look at his past and the number of hypocrisies. Because remember, they do not care about principles. Aside from the fact that Hegseth is a prior never-Trumper, Trump supposedly against war, against the Iraq War. He's the anti-war candidate. Hegseth is historically a huge defender of George W. Bush, a huge defender of torture techniques used during that era, a huge defender of invading Iraq. But think about this. Trump wrote in his glowing announcement about Pete Hegseth that part of his amazing qualifications are that Pete went to Princeton and then he got a graduate degree at Harvard. But we have been told by the very same MAGA people for years that Ivy League schools are nothing but worthless left-wing indoctrination. Why is it that Pete is a good pick because he went to Princeton and Harvard, even though Princeton and Harvard are terrible and woke and horrible now? The answer is whatever is convenient to them today. That is all that matters. What does MAGA benefit from today? The bottom line is that in general, with Trump's forthcoming cabinet, only sycophantic admirers need apply. Trump wants suck-ups. Trump wants people who see him as the greatest thing since sliced bread, period. And think back to when Lloyd Austin was nominated by Joe Biden to be Secretary of Defense. Black, 4-star general, former CENTCOM commander, completely qualified, but he's black. So it was a DEI hire. It was simply Joe Biden trying to get various colors and genders working for him. But Trump nominates a completely unqualified 44-year-old Fox News co-host and we're supposed to believe that it's about merit. We're supposed to believe that it's about ability to do the job. This is only about loyalty. This is how the mob bosses and the dictators do human resources and hiring. And if right-wing hypocrisy were a physical object, you could forget about building a house. You could build a city out of right-wing hypocrisy if it was a physical object. Now, here is a bonus clip from Pete Hegseth saying that we should simply not have any women in combat roles.
I'm straight up just saying we should not have women in combat roles.
Right.
It hasn't made us more effective, hasn't made us more lethal, has made fighting more complicated. We've all served with women, and they're great. It just, our institutions don't have to incentivize that in places where traditionally, not traditionally, over human history, men in those positions are more capable.
There you go. So that is what is forthcoming as Secretary of Defense if Pete Hegseth can get himself confirmed. Let's now really talk about the war aspect of this selection. Donald Trump has run for almost a decade on being against war, being the anti-war candidate. He falsely claimed to have always been against the Iraq war. It's not true, but it doesn't matter if his followers believe him. That's all that they care about. Trump has said, oh, Hillary would get us into 3 wars. Biden will get us into wars. Kamala Harris will get us into wars. And now he has selected to be his Secretary of Defense, running essentially the largest military in the world. He has selected a massive, bloodthirsty war hawk, Fox and Friends co-host. I know it's weird to say it. Fox and Friends co-host Pete Hegseth. Here is Pete Hegseth repeatedly advocating for military strikes against Iran. This is what could be in America's future.
We take out key infrastructure. We take out your missile sites. We take out nuclear developments.
That is
we
not
take out
a popular idea.
Capabilities. Or you know what? Take out a Quds headquarters while you're at it if you want. I understand that's not a popular idea. I don't want boots on the ground. I don't want occupation. I don't want endless war. But Iran has been in an endless war with us for 40 years. Either we put up and shut up now and stop it, or we kind of wait, go back to the table and let them dither while they attempt to continue to develop the capabilities to do precisely what they've said they want to do. So either we're honest about the nature of this regime, or I think we miss a moment. So I think it's been played well so far, but we should keep the initiative on our side.
That's right. We need the initiative. I'm not for boots on the ground, but here is a list of all of the stuff I would do militarily against Iran. Now, there are basically 3 ways that this can go. Way number 1, Pete Hegseth, Secretary of Defense. What a clown car. I mean, I'm embarrassed for the country every time I say future Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth. Possibility number 1 is Pete Hegseth falls in line with what Trump claims to support, which is no military engagements, no war, no conflicts, and that's it. Second possibility, it is Hegseth who converts Trump to, we're going to go into Iran, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, maybe North Korea. I'll get to that in a moment. Possibility number 3 is that it implodes completely and Trump ends up firing Pete Hegseth the way he's done to so many of his prior cabinet members. Those are sort of the 3 possibilities. Now, here is another clip of Pete Hegseth arguing for a preemptive strike against North Korea. This is a little bit of an older clip. The point here is Donald Trump has not only selected someone completely unqualified for one of the most important roles for national security in the country and arguably the world, he selected a guy whose entire track record in terms of his positions is the opposite of what Trump claims to believe.
Yeah, the problem with that is it's reactive. It's not proactive. And what will annihilate North Korea after we're dead?
Yeah, I mean,
we have to do something now.
There's merit in a preemptive strike. If you got to do it right, you got to it's got to be decisive. How comprehensive is that first strike capability? But history shows us that when you let dictators get the worst weapons in the world, they wield a ton of influence. And what about the history in North Korea? Has shown us that they're ever going to stop. We passed that accord in 1994, and they've only gotten more advanced ever since.
And they're becoming more.
There you go. Clips from Media Matters there. Not only has Pete Hegseth really demonstrated his bloodthirsty war hawk credentials. I mean, if John Bolton was given a list of Pete Hegseth's ideas, Bolton would probably say that's a little too hawkish even for me, which really says something. Hegseth has also lobbied Trump to be looser in terms of accountability for our military. He's lobbied Trump for pardons for war crimes. This guy it's a competition. Is he a disaster more because he's unqualified, or is he a disaster more because he's a bloodthirsty war hawk? It really might be 50-50. Wow. Let's take a break. We have more selections from Donald Trump. We're going to see our friend Anthony Scaramucci mixing it up with a CNBC host, and it gets really weird. It's a big program, and it's only about halfway. Don't forget that the best way to support the David Pakman Show is by becoming a member, which gives you access to the daily bonus show, the regular show with no commercials. You also get access to our entire archive of every episode dating back a really long time, and plenty of other awesome membership perks. Go to joinpakman.com, joinpakman.com. This you have to see. Pro-Trump CNBC host Joe Kernan just lost his mind on Anthony Scaramucci after the election. Something about Scaramucci wildly triggered Kernan. Some of you may recall that Joe Kernan's gone after me on Twitter as well. Anthony Scaramucci made perfectly reasonable criticisms of Trump and Trump's agenda. Trump won. Scaramucci acknowledges it. And Joe Kernan, for whatever reason, is just losing his mind. Let's take a look at this. It developed slowly, and then all of a sudden, Kernan's just flipping out on Scaramucci. Look at this.
You know, there were certain things that happened in that campaign, Andrew, that I'm not in love with. There was a coarseness to some of the rhetoric. There was some threatening suggestions to people related to being political adversaries and so on and so forth. And I hope we can put that rhetoric aside and we can move forward and think about what we're going to do as a country to unify the country and make the people in the country, particularly the lower and middle income people,
completely reasonable what Anthony is saying.
The country more prosperous.
Yeah, the rhetoric got heated everywhere. You got pretty heated, Anthony, at times.
Joe, how did I get heated? What did I say, Joe?
About Trump?
Yeah, what did I say? I said I repeated what he was saying. And I said this is wrong.
Anthony,
come on, Joe.
You have had an utter disdain for Trump. You'll always be welcome at the table of legacy media and have people nodding as you trash Trump. That's always going to happen. But aren't you the slightest bit embarrassed or at least humbled about how wrong you were about
Joe,
the feeling of most Americans, let me finish, and for enthusiastically supporting a candidate who a majority of people thought had no business being anywhere near the Oval Office? And you're a Republican, and you saw all the different policies that she was talking about are anathema to what you thought your whole life, and yet you went along with it. Do you ever eat any crow, or not even a little crow wing, really like a little capon? Or you just, I mean, Michael Avenatti could still be on TV trashing Trump. You'll always find a place on TV. If he wasn't.
Look at Kernan winding himself up. Anthony Scaramucci's not even participating at this point because Kernan's just going nuts.
In prison, he'd still be on CNN running for president with Brian Stelter. Just give me a little bit, Anthony, about how wrong you were.
Joe, first of all, I immediately put out a congratulatory tweet. They won, we lost. In the immortal words of Barry Diller when he lost a Paramount deal. Next, Joe, what would you like me to do? Do you want me to get on bended knee before you?
No, I thought you were going to start that it's going to...
That's not even what America's about, Joe. We have a violent disagreement about lots of things related to Trump's personality. You like Trump. I was up close to Trump. I got to see the ugliest of what he is. And by the way, Joe, it's not just me. There were 40 of us that worked for the president that warned people.
So I think he's been very good for your. I think he's been very good for your career, Anthony. I think he's been incredibly good. You're here, are you not? And you're going to be welcome anywhere you want to go. I think he's been very good for you. And you be
here. So the way that Kernan is treating Scaramucci, not only is it disgusting and borderline psychotic, he kind of seems jealous in some weird way.
You're going to live off this for another 4 years.
Joe, Why don't you
Anthony.
calm down? Why don't you calm down a second, Joe? We know each other a long time. Are you saying that you and I can't disagree on somebody's personality? Is that what you're saying? And you're saying what I'm saying in terms of identifying those features and traits of the personality. You don't see those too, but you're choosing to ignore them?
I guess 75 million people looked at everything you looked at and decided that there were other things that...
But there were 67 million people that didn't, Joe. That's what makes America, Joe. That's what makes America, Joe. But you're saying to me that stuff that I was saying wasn't factually true. If somebody's saying they're going to use the American military to go after their political adversaries, and I say, geez, that sounds very un-American to somebody like me.
Is that what he said,
saying,
Vivek?
oh, no.
Is that what he's going to do?
Of course he said it.
So let me see if I can.
We'll go to
So then they bring in Vivek Ramaswamy to try to clean it up. This is something that's happening with these MAGAs. They are emboldened and they see it as open season. We're going to start treating everybody else like crap. No respect whatsoever. You know, the truth is people win and lose elections. We won the last one. They refused to accept it. They tried an insurrection. They incited riots. They stuck to it for 4 years that Trump's really the guy who won. Now we lost. And what do we say? We lost. We've got to figure out why. We've got to improve. We've got to better the messaging. We've got to better the policy. We've got to come up with a roster of people that are going to bring us there. There was no fraud this time. There was no fraud last time. And Joe Kernan, and you should see my email, by the way, these are the sorest winners that I have maybe ever seen. We aren't stewing in the loss. We're moving on. And Anthony Scaramucci is saying, listen, I congratulated the guy. My view is he's unqualified. 70-something Americans said they want him. 70-something Americans said, 77-something million Americans said they don't want him and voted for Kamala Harris instead. We're moving on. We aren't MAGA 2020, where we're going to sit around behaving the way Joe Kernan is now behaving. We didn't do it then, and we're not going to do it now. And the way that Kernan is treating people in the aftermath of this victory by Trump is disgusting. But if you think Kernan's disgusting, just wait till you see Jim Jordan. All right, so let me set this up for you. Republican Congressman Jim Jordan, who endlessly talked about irregularities, rigging, voter fraud, voter theft, massive dumps, the whole thing for 4 years starting after 2020. That Jim Jordan goes on CNN and has a complete and total meltdown when CNN host Dana Bash confronts him with the reality that when they lose, they say it was fraud. And when they win, they say it was fine. That's, of course, the reality. It's another one of these situations where there's no principle at play. It's just when we lose, it was rigged. And when we win, it was fair. Jim Jordan doesn't like it. He doesn't like Dana Bash. He doesn't like CNN. This gets very, very wild. But this is how these people operate.
But voting fraud this time, it seems to me that Republicans claim voting fraud and election integrity when you lose and not when you win.
No, I mean, again, as I said before, this election, I think, was the greatest political comeback we've ever seen. I mean, he did something that even Teddy Roosevelt couldn't do, for goodness sake. And the country...
But you think it was a free and fair election?
No, this election, you just interviewed the Latino, I think, restaurant owner, or a restaurant worker, and... he said he was tired of all the woke stuff. This election was real simple. You had back-to-back administrations. We got something we very seldom get in American history, American politics. Back-to-back administrations now running for the top job, and people could do a direct comparison. And they said, we like what we had under President Trump.
Now understand that this has nothing to do with the question. Nothing at all. They spent 4 years pushing voter fraud. They even spent hours pushing it on November 5th. Until it became clear Trump was going to win. And now Jim Jordan wants to talk about, oh, this is a referendum. That's not the question, Jim.
But last time around,
we like the safe streets versus the record
last
crime.
time around, your leader claimed that there were problems with
secure
fraud.
Border versus the open border.
Right, those are...
He doesn't want to let her talk.
Those are policies.
That's what this election was about.
That's totally fair. But last time around, it wasn't so much about the policy differences or the personality differences. There were false claims about election fraud when Donald Trump lost. This time, Donald Trump won, and you think the election was free and fair. Do you see there's a little bit of a...
No, I think the Democrats got to ask, why did
there?
we go from getting 81 million to getting 70 million? What happened to those 10 million people? Maybe they need to, maybe it's not smart to run an election where you have no vision, no record to run on.
Do you believe
you're just
that
going to call the other side names?
Do you believe...
Now, it's by the way, it's critically important to reinforce that the margin is getting smaller and smaller in terms of that gap. You know, it was, Kamala Harris got 12 million fewer votes than 2020. Well, when you're trying to remove Trump, that will motivate people significantly. So it's not a surprise that turnout was down for Democrats. But now Kamala Harris is closing in on 73 million votes. And now the gap from 2020 is smaller and smaller. Trump is down to only 50.2% of the vote. It may be the case that Trump ends up winning without even the 50% of the vote that many Republicans were claiming gives him a mandate. So even these numbers that Jim Jordan is using to try to get out of this problem, fraud then, no fraud now, how is it possible? Even the numbers are not accurate.
That the 2024 election was free and fair.
I do.
And why was it different?
I do. You can tell he knows he's in a corner because his voice went up 2 octaves.
From 2020 when he lost. Is that the only difference?
No, there were concerns about 2020 with all the mail-in voting that happened. You know, Pennsylvania had like 2-point-something million mail-in ballots come in without any signature verification, which was required under Pennsylvania statute. So there were all kinds of concerns with how the 2020 election was carried out. But
there was absolutely
the biggest question Democrats need to be asking, what happened to the 10 million voters that Joe Biden got that didn't come out for Kamala Harris? A bunch of them, President Trump's numbers were right up where they were in 2020, but the Democrats were much lower. I think
that's actually a critical admission. Jim Jordan is admitting Trump really didn't do any better than in 2020. That's really actually an incredible takeaway, which is for all of the disaster that was supposedly the Biden administration, Trump got roughly the same number of votes that he got 4 years ago. He didn't grow his base at all, or if he grew it, he had equivalent losses to basically make it the same. Yes, Kamala Harris did not generate the voter enthusiasm that Biden generated when the goal was remove Trump. People forget about how bad it was. A bunch of people didn't vote. That's true. But overall, the total turnout seems to be only about 0.5 to 1% lower than it was last year in total. Kamala Harris's decline from Biden's is shrinking. But the incredible admission there is Trump, as bad as things were, didn't grow his level of support at all. He lost with the 74 million last time, and he won with the 74 million this time. Now, Trump may end up with a little more once the vote is counted, too. Let's be fair.
Because they had no vision, no record to run on, and they just wanted to call everyone names. Turns out when you tell people, oh, you're fascist, racist, deplorable garbage, they don't like that. And then when you use lawfare to go after their candidate, they don't like that either.
Well,
that's why they came out so. On top of the economy.
So listen, he talks for 20 more seconds, but he says nothing new. The question is, what really is the difference between massive fraud that stole it from Trump in 2020 and no fraud this time? And Jim Jordan goes, well, you know, there were all these ballots in Pennsylvania last time with no signature. Trump was claiming that that Pennsylvania was a problem this time as well, until it became clear that he was going to win. There is nothing there. The only difference, the only explanation, the only justification internally that they have for why last time there was fraud and this time there wasn't is that last time Trump lost and this time Trump won. That is it, and it's pathetic. If you value what we do at The David Pakman Show, remember to support us on Patreon. Go to patreon.com/David Pakman Show, where you can get access to behind-the-scenes videos, the daily bonus show, the commercial-free daily show. You can support the show for as little as $2 a month. Check it out at patreon.com/David Pakman Show. As we continue to move forward towards the potential of Secretary of State Marco Rubio, I wanted to just kind of fill in a little bit more in terms of the background of the relationship between Rubio and Trump with one funny little anecdote. We already discussed a couple of days ago when we learned Trump would be selecting Rubio to be his Secretary of State. We talked about the conflicts. We talked about Trump saying that Rubio is a lightweight choker. We talked about Rubio saying that Trump is a con man who has no business being near the Oval Office. We went through that already. There's one other funny little detail, which is I saw this clip resurfaced of Marco Rubio insinuating that Donald Trump has a small, you know what I'm talking about. And this was a funny little, the absurdity of the 2016 Republican primary has kind of been lost in the absurdity of the last 9 years. But remember this wild, wild moment.
Have you seen his hands? They're like this. And you know what they say about men with small hands? You can't trust them.
Look at those hands. Are they small hands? And he referred to my hands. If they're small, something else must be small. I guarantee you there's no problem. I guarantee it. So I looked at him, I said, Marco, those hands can hit a golf ball 285 yards.
So anyway, you don't usually end up in the surreal, and I would argue dystopian situation where the president and secretary of state previously attacked each other over the size of their manhood. That's not typically the way that this stuff goes. Now, what is this really about, bigger picture? This is really about, I would say, three different things. Number one, all that really matters to Trump is if you eventually kiss the ring. Trump called Ted Cruz's wife ugly. Ted Cruz said horrible things about Trump. But ultimately, Ted Cruz kind of came around and said, I see where my bread is buttered. I'm either in or out when it comes to the good graces of those in power in the Republican Party. I want to be in. I want to be in, said Ted Cruz. That's my Ted Cruz impression. I went to Cancun. So you just forget it. And as long as you kiss the ring, in a way, I think Trump kind of likes the idea that people who he previously Trump sees it as successfully dominating someone when they used to make fun of you and then they come to work for you. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Vote Trump. Whatever you say, sir. Absolutely. Trump doesn't care about the humiliation part of it. He doesn't care about the sideshow. He doesn't care about the clown car. To Trump, it's, I ultimately dominated you. I'm on top now because you're working for me. And that's really what underlies this, number one. Number two, we know that there were explosive high-profile firings all over the place, demands for resignation, submissions of resignations during Trump's first term. Rex Tillerson as Secretary of State is a notable one. Expect it to happen again. All of these names that we're hearing now, Elon and Vivek, Marco Rubio, maybe ALINA HABBA, we'll talk about that. We'll go through the list. Assume that half of these people aren't going to make it halfway through. Some of them may not even make it a year. And that's another aspect of it. And then number three, just a final reminder, the principles they claim to care about, they don't really care about. It's just something that they say. All right, what about ALINA HABBA? I've got good news and I've got bad news, and they're both the same. ALINA HABBA might be Donald Trump's press secretary. Now, why do I say that's good news and bad news? It's good news because her name had been floated as Attorney General. If you say to me, where can she do less damage as Attorney General or as Secretary of State? Whoa. Where can she do less damage as Attorney General or Press Secretary? Obviously, she can do less damage as Press Secretary. So that's good news. The bad news is that she's completely a completely toxic force in American politics. Now, as a reminder, this was one of Donald Trump's attorneys during his various trials and tribulations legally. Here is Hannity last night asking her, is there any truth to the rumor, ALINA?
Let's talk about the possibility and reports that you might be the president's press secretary. Any truth to it?
I leave it to the president and three people that are on my board of directors. That's Luke, Chloe, and Parker, my children. Everybody will know in time.
All right, now I got to go in a little harder. Have there been any discussions about it?
Sean, you know me better than that. You would never have me on primetime if I answered questions like that. Look, President Trump has put together an amazing cabinet. I'm really proud of the work that him and his transition team have done. I think when we look at everybody, they are killing it on all fronts.
Okay, yeah. So anyway, she doesn't really answer. What's going on here behind the scenes is that apparently Trump is considering two people for press secretary. On the one hand, it's ALINA HABBA. On the other hand, it's that guy, Scott Jennings, who has been appearing on CNN throughout the election and is a really hardcore Trump suck-up. Trump's considering one or the other, and so maybe that's what's going on here. Just as a reminder of how just bonkers ALINA HABBA is, here is ALINA HABBA when she was representing Donald Trump, asked, "What is your legal strategy, ALINA?" And she just spit out this incomprehensible word salad.
Tell us what your strategy is going forward, ALINA.
It's very simple. The left-wing media, unfortunately, will report cases. I had another case that just went through in New York, the great state of New York, which has completely fallen apart. My strategy is to use the facts, to use the transcripts. We make a record, even when they try and gag us, even when they try and tell us, ALINA, I'm going to put you in jail if you object to a PowerPoint slide that proves your case. It doesn't matter. I object anyway. We made a record, and the record is clear because their orders are transparent. They show a completely biased transcript. They show that the hearings, the law is not on their side.
All right, I won't even torture you with more of it. Completely in over her head. This is who might be the next press secretary. We are, of course, going to follow the selections, but if you think this potential pick is bad, I have no choice but to tell you about the disaster that is the incoming CIA director. In a move that is out of a house of horrors, Donald Trump has selected a cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs election denier to be his CIA director. Donald Trump choosing John Ratcliffe, the former director of national intelligence under Trump, to be CIA director.
Some breaking news to tell you about. Donald Trump has made his pick to head the CIA. He has chosen the former director of national intelligence, John Ratcliffe, to lead the agency, bypassing some more controversial picks like Kash Patel, who have been reported to have been under consideration for the CIA or the FBI.
Okay, so again, it's sort of like good news, bad news. The idea of Kash Patel running the CIA is incomprehensibly horrifying to the point where I'm not even comfortable talking about it, but it seems we don't have to worry about it because it's not going to be Kash Patel. John Ratcliffe is the epitome of the I pretend to be a serious person while I'm really just a more serious looking sycophant who goes along with whatever Trump says. Ratcliffe promoted the idea of widespread 2020 election fraud, foreign interference, massive dumps, the whole thing, despite no evidence. And he is now potentially going to be the director of the CIA. A Fox News host will be Secretary of Defense. An election denier will be director of the CIA. Recall that intelligence agencies in 2020, 2021 concluded there was no foreign manipulation that affected the election outcome. John Ratcliffe kept raising that, well, we think it may have happened. There's the potential for that. Ratcliffe is accused of delaying an intelligence report on foreign interference because the report said there was none. He allegedly delayed it because Trump allies pressured him to do it because they wanted to leave that report out in order to bolster their claims that there was foreign interference, even though the report would have clarified that there was not. When Trump started calling for, we need to investigate the fraud, John Ratcliffe said, yes, we do. I support those investigations. That, number one, completely exceeded his role as director of national intelligence. And of course, it was completely and totally politically motivated. It had already been looked at up, down, and sideways every way. And Ratcliffe was a major architect in creating doubt about the legitimacy of the election overall, which had such a corrosive effect on democracy. As we've talked about before, If you believe that the elections can't be trusted, it makes you in general less likely to vote, less likely to believe that your vote matters, and on and on and on. This is a disaster. Now, at such a difficult time, if we are looking for anything positive, I hesitate to even say this because I'm not an accelerationist. Accelerationism would say, allow your political opponent to make things as bad as possible, because the worse they make it, the quicker the whole thing will collapse, and then we can rebuild it the way we want to rebuild it. The reason I'm not an accelerationist is that big picture historically, it's never worked. When you look at the biggest eras of advancement in the United States, they've all been incremental and built on one step at a time, one brick at a time. It was the progressive era that ended around the teens or 20s in the 20th century, the civil rights era, the New Deal era just after World War II. Those were not accelerationist movements. Those were some of the most successful periods of left-wing advancement in the country. They were not built on break everything down and destroy it. So I'm not an accelerationist. The one thing I can offer to you, and you tell me whether this is hopeful or scary. This is already looking so much worse than Trump's first term, which was an abortive disaster. As you know, that first term was so bad, it led to Trump being made a one-term president. This is already looking so much worse than that first term that we can hope that the American people will realize how bad of an idea this was. And then MAGA is going to have a disastrous midterm in 2026. That's what I can offer. I don't know if it will happen. I don't know if it resonates. I don't know if it's actually more harm than good, but it's what I've got. I'm trying to make excuse me. I'm trying to make lemonade from the very few lemons that I'm finding underneath the desk. On the bonus show today, what happened with Alan Lichtman's prediction? We will discuss it, and we will discuss the system that he uses, the 13 keys. We will talk about what education might look like under the forthcoming Trump administration. And we will also discuss the harebrained selection of Mike Huckabee to be American ambassador to Israel. All of those stories and more on today's bonus show. You can sign up at joinpacman.com. You can use the coupon code NOTAGAIN to save bigly. And please do remember to pre-order my forthcoming book, The Echo Machine, available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Audible, Apple Music podcasts, Kindle, and everywhere books, ebooks, and audiobooks are sold. I'll update you on pre-order numbers tomorrow or the next day. See you on the bonus show, and I'll be back here tomorrow. Thanks a lot for watching today's show. I just want to take a second to tell you about today's sponsors. Every single time you see me here in the studio recording the show, I am using an Uplift standing desk. I've been using Uplift standing desks for years, long before they were a sponsor. A standing desk gets my creative juices flowing. It's better for your health. And Uplift Desk is the best in the business. Sturdier than other brands I've tried, thousands of ways to customize the desk, choose the shape, material, accessories, and more. Go to upliftdesk.com/Pacman to receive up to $300 off, plus 4 free desk accessories. The link is in the description.